me see. Okay, let's talk about autonomous vehicles. Okay, great. So this is NHTSA's, their scenario, 0 to 4 autonomy. You familiar with this? Everybody? Yeah? Okay, so 0 to 4 autonomous vehicles. 0 has no autonomous functions. 4 is completely self-driving. So you don't have to do anything. You just sit and ride. Right now we're seeing 2s and 3s, 2s on the market. High-end vehicles, again. Maybe some 3s moving into there. So we're really moving, but again, it's big money to be made here, so that's why you're seeing such heavy investment. Speaking of money, there are 7 OEMs or tech companies, read Google, who expect to bring driverless cars to the market by 2020. Wow. Now we don't know how, we don't know where, we don't know what they drive on. Look at the money being expended here. Google has already spent $60 million. Toyota announced recently that they're planning to spend $1 billion over the next 5 years to bring this technology to market. And they are so not the only one. Big, big money driving this train. We don't have it. We're not going to stop it. Well, there's regulation. That's what Google sees. So if you haven't ever seen what the Google car sees, that's what that looks like. We don't know how they'll do this. I read an article the other day that some people think it'll be controlled access because there's fewer conflict points. Makes some sense. Some people think that a natural first evolution would be trucks, self-driving long-haul trucks. I don't know. I don't see a lot of testing in that, so I'm not sure about that. The hardest one is urban streets, right? You got soccer balls and dogs and puppies and kids and all kinds of things happening on urban streets. And it's also lower speed. So it's not clear how this is going to happen. The other thing that we're hearing and that you'll read about is that these are the kind of numbers that you see in self-driving vehicles, 2035, but also that they're very likely to enable electric vehicles. There was an article, I think it was in the Post, maybe it was in the Wall Street Journal, last week I think, that Google filed something with the FCC where they're working with an electric company on inductive charging technology. So they're investing in inductive charging to power their little cars. By the way, those are made of foam. So they're seeing that kind of an enabling technology for the self-driving vehicles. And you can see the kind of numbers that are being projected for electric vehicle charging stations in the, 2021. That's 5 years. We sneeze in 5-year segments, right? That's like tomorrow in our world. So yeah, so electric vehicles as well. The last dot that I want to put here, and then we'll really pull it together. And that's this transformation from this is what you heard from your high school students. This is the transformation of driving, of transportation being defined by the cool Ferrari that you own, to transportation simply being a service that you have access to. Right? So Uber is one of the cornerstones of this kind of service model. Check out the time frame here. It started in 2009. It's now reached $2.8 billion in total funding. That's crazy. 58 countries, 300 cities worldwide. In how many years is that? 6 years? 6 years. It didn't even exist 6 years ago. What, do you have any projects that we're still working on 6 years? Yeah, right. That's the kind of disruption that we're seeing. This is also part of that sharing economy, right? This willingness to share rides. That's one of the building blocks of this. This is the other one. This phone connects us. Remember, we talked about the connectivity. It can 30%, this is about, again, urban people, young people say, get around just fine without driving. Happy to share a vehicle, happy to ride transit, don't want to maintain the car, don't want to have a big garage in the back seat, in the back of the house. Begin to put it together, and you get transportation as a service model. This is Ubigo. It's a test in Gothenburg, Sweden. Ubigo means that you get a subscription that you can access from your phone, and that subscription entitles you to access a gas-powered vehicle, an electric vehicle, a carpool, a transit, bike, or a taxi. And that subscription service is cheaper than auto ownership. And so when you can have that meet your transportation needs, why would you go to all the trouble to have a car? So this is Peugeot's same idea. It's a bundled service. You buy credit online, and that bundled services gives you access to different kinds of cars, a scooter, a bike, a van, and then the accessories to put the bike on the van. Now, if you think that's those crazy Europeans, all of the major automotive industries are looking at this. I read an article, I think it was again yesterday, that Ford is working with a company called IDEO to envision what their business will look like when they are a service. They're not fighting this. They're just trying to morph into it. How does Ford become not a car company, but a service provider of transportation? That's the way that the future is going. And the Ubers of the world, the connectivity through the phones, and then connect the autonomous vehicles. Now think self-driving shared Uber. Okay? Self-driving shared Uber. So my Uber is going to pick me up and take me to work, and it's going to go get you and pick him up and go take him to get his kids, and then it's going to go pick you to take you up to go get some groceries, and then it's going to go pick you to take you back to work because you got to work late today. All the same car. The same car. The belief is that many, particularly the early self-driving vehicles, will be used as a part of a car-as-a-service model. And worldwide, this makes a lot of sense because 85% of the world's population doesn't have a driver's license. It's expected to begin right now because you're already seeing the tests being done with not autonomous vehicles being tested right now. Check out this. This was a study done to look at if you took New York City's yellow cab service and you replaced it with shared use autonomous vehicles and had the same level of service as you currently have with the yellow cab fleet. The cost of service goes from $4 per trip mile to 50 cents. Wow. Talk about social equity. Wow. Now, think about connecting the dots now. Think about land use. What does this do to land use? Look at the current numbers for land use. In the US, we have 3 to 8 parking spaces per car in the US. Wow. And by the way, we only pay for a fraction of that. We heavily subsidize parking in this country because you don't pay for it. 31% of central business districts in the top 41% of major cities is parking. Think about it in your major cities. You got a building and it's got a moat of parking around it. You got a building and you got half of the building either above ground or below ground that's parking. And now we can share that parking or share those vehicles. Average car says idle 23 hours a day. I actually didn't believe that. I've seen it in so many places now. So just imagine, what could you do in your urban areas if you freed up all that parking place? What kind of economic development could you have? How many more people, think about urbanization trends, can you house now in that same space? The reason 675 million parking spaces in urban areas. Check this one out. One shared use autonomous vehicle makes 5 times as many trips as the average car. So think about how many cars we don't have to store anymore. It's huge in terms of land use shifts. What is not clear at all is in the number of trips, right? Because shared AVs, now, so my mother, we were just talking about my mother, who's 85, and she's got Bell's palsy. She can't drive, but she could then, right? Would you put your kid in the AV and just send them off to school? right? Hard for us to imagine that, but 20 years from now, I don't know. I don't know. So it's not clear what kind of travel patterns it's going to enable, but it probably means we can do a whole lot more trips with many fewer vehicles. So these are the kind of time frames, because if it seems kind of far off, marry those up, 5 to 10 years, automated vehicles, connected vehicles, and the lifespan of your roads and bridges. So if you think about a new road or a new bridge in particular that you're building right now, what's the design life? 50 years. Wow. Wow. How are you thinking about this stuff when you plan today? Wow, it's hard. So we talked a lot about this, and I do think there's a lot of implications in the planning. So you guys are working on your long-range transportation plan right now. So impressed that you're thinking about this stuff. Here's are just some other kinds of transportation planning documents. I told the group this morning, I can't think of a single one that's not implicated by this shift. I can't think of one. Your highway safety improvement plan, asset management congestion plan, your ITS architecture, TIPS, STIPS. When we talked to some of the AASHTO Committee on Planning, they would love to do scenario planning around these different scenarios, but that's even hard right now because we don't have even basic data. These are some of the things that might be implicated. So if you've got a 4-lane facility right now, can you now make it 6? Smaller vehicles, smaller headway, get different throughput through. It changes everything. Are you going to need dedicated lanes? I think it's very interesting to think about when every vehicle is self-driving, but the hard part is the many years we have of a mixed fleet. That's the really hard part. Will we need dedicated lanes at some point? Regulations are, of course, the big part that's up in the air. The automotive industry is very interested in governments not regulating too early. Writing a regulation is an extremely difficult thing to do on a good day. And with this much uncertainty, you're almost guaranteed to make a mistake and have externalities and all kinds of things that you really would not want to have. So they're very anxious for governments not to regulate too soon. It's going to be tough, though. We're seeing some public trial. Fleets are individual. Are shared use AVs, are they going to be in a fleet model? A lot of people think that that's going to be the first way that you'll see a lot of economic savings for organizations, companies that have fleets like you. That you can have some shared use AVs. You need much fewer of them, same number of trips, get a lot more efficiency. You don't have big fleets of cars sitting around parked all the time. Or is it going to be that I'm going to go buy mine and you're going to go buy yours? You know, I actually can't imagine that. I can't even imagine it. Parking reduction, curb access. Now we're going to need curb access. Rather than storing the cars, you're going to need to be able to have pickup and drop-off space. Revenue generation. Do you have any little towns in Iowa where they get a fairly large share of their revenue base from tickets? Or that doesn't happen in Iowa? Yeah. And so now you have self-driving vehicles that don't break the law. Wow, what does it do, that revenue stream? Transit's really interesting. For big transit networks, for big transit networks like we have in DC, our New York City subway systems, they carry so much ridership that even with shared AVs, you can't imagine it supplanting it. So there really is a strong role, I believe, for that transit. I think the tricky bit is where you have marginal transit service, and then what are those efficiencies? How does that play out? Or is now this the solution to the last mile problem? Right? So now you actually can incentivize more transit because you can get from your home to the transit stop exactly at the right time. So it's not clear how that might play out. It's actually crystal ball gazing. And so while that sounds very, not very powerful, I do think there are some things that we can do today to prepare for this. We don't know any of this stuff. Or at least I don't know any of this stuff. So if anybody here knows any of this stuff, say so. We don't really know what the adoption rates will be of this technology. We don't really know how it's going to roll out, when, what kind of penetration rates we'll have in the vehicle fleet, how quickly. We don't really know what the rollout scenarios are likely to look like. How much are these things going to cost? Is it going to be like a Tesla where there's only a handful of them because nobody can afford them? How's that going to play out? We don't really know what the impacts are going to be. Does it incentivize urbanization or does it incentivize sprawl? Is it more VMT? Is it less VMT? You can actually argue it all the way around, and we don't know right now. It's just so early. You just know that it's going to rock our world. What we heard from some of the AASHTO planners is that the only way that they could conceive of managing this were two things. And one was to identify high-risk projects, because not every projects are equally impacted, right? So these are some of the things that they came up with and that I came up with as well. If you have a project in your district that's requiring the purchase of right-of-way, I would say that's a high-risk project, because it's not clear to me that you're going to need more right-of-way. And particularly if you're in an urban area where that right-of-way purchase is an eminent domain situation, where you're going to now take some, excuse me, but I need to take a part of your business here, right? Then that really makes it high impact. I think it's only a matter of time that our customers become really smart about this. They're reading the same articles that we are. And they go, okay, that environmental document that you're doing right here, where you're going to take some of my property, that no build option, I want to understand why it doesn't consider all this technology. I want to understand why you really need that extra space when everything I'm reading in the Wall Street Journal tells me that we're going to need less space for transportation. So I want to know why we can't revisit that no build option. I don't think it's that far off before we have a really super educated customer base that's asking some pretty good questions. Any great big investment, I think, needs to be examined really closely. Anything that's requiring new parking, wow, would I examine that one. New sign bridges. This came up when I was talking to the head of a state DOT, not too far from here. And they're watching the same thing happen that you are watching. And so they're looking at sign bridges where that bridge is, or sign truss, whatever you guys call it here. They're looking at whether it's holding up a guide sign or whether it's holding up a variable message sign, saying, how long is it that I'm going to need to put that sign up there on that big bridge? And so they're looking at, can they maintain them longer rather than replace them? Because it's just not clear how much longer you're going to need them. 511, 511 I think is tricky. Personally, I would not be pouring tons of money into vast 511 capabilities. I would rather enable a lot of other people to do some of the things that 511 does. And I would make sure that I had a 511 presence for those specialized situations where somebody else you can't access it another way. Maybe you do want some official information, but I would begin to think about 511 in a way that it's tailored to what government can do. And there's no way we can compete with what's going on these apps and everything. So they said to us, look at the high-risk projects. And then here's the other thing they said. Right now, we just don't know, so build in flexibility into the process. And we talked about this morning as well. I think it would make a lot of sense to build in pause points at every key part in the process. So when you have a long-range transportation plan, and now you go to a tip or a stip, say, okay, wait, time out. Let's think about those high-risk projects. What's different now than when we originally envisioned it 5 years ago in the long-range plan? What's changed? Okay, so it's gone, it's in the tip. Now it's time to go to the environmental process. Okay, time out. What's changed in the intervening 2 years since we put it on the tip and we're ready to go to environmental process? Go through the environmental process. Get ready to go to PS&E development. Pause. Okay, what's different? Does it still make sense? What do we know about the technology? Maybe we know now it is definitely going to be DSRC. We'll go with DSRC now. It wasn't clear 4 years ago, but now it's clear. So now you know. I would even pause when you get done with PS&E and getting ready to let it, because that's when you're really getting ready to put the money in the pavement, right? I would pause one more time and say, does it still make sense? A big project, how long might it be in PS&E development? Big interchange, so, for example. What's PS&E development?
4 years.
4 years? Huh! We could have a whole new Uber, a whole new Airbnb in 4 years, right? So in that time while you're in PS&E development, the world may have shifted. So I really think you would be wise to literally build in the pause points. Now the other thing I'll share with you, let me make sure how my time's doing, that I mentioned to the group this morning. Normally, my work is in leadership development. I do leadership development programs on decision making and time management and motivation management, and it's all grounded in neuroscience. It's fascinating, fascinating. Here's the bit of neuroscience that is important to you about this issue. Your brain is designed for efficiency. Imagine how slow things would go if you had to rethink every single thing every single time from the ground up. Right? You couldn't just walk in here, you had to think about where am I, where do I go? If you had to rethink every single thing, we would not get anything done. So our brains have evolved over time to be very efficient. They are constantly projecting what they expect in the world. You expected to walk into here today and have a room, like you didn't even think about it. And that's the way our brains are efficient. What that means is that when you see anything in your environment, you are making it fit your model in your head. Right? You make it fit. Whether it fits or not, kind of irrelevant to your brain, it's making it fit. It's called confirmation bias. So here's my little story about confirmation bias. When I grew up, my dad was a band director. And we were in a little town in Texas, and my dad he taught kids music from the time they were little bitty through high school. So my sister and I grew up with music in the house. We watched a lot of PBS, and it was kind of this thing where we'd watch, the orchestra or the band on PBS, and we'd have to pick out the different instruments. So we learned at a very young age how to pick out all the different instruments. So fast forward, I'm in high school. I'm at a barbecue cook-off. And a friend of mine walks up, and he is wearing a camo baseball cap. Okay, it's kind of tan, camo baseball cap. And on the front of the baseball cap, it says, BASS tournament. Right? BASS tournament. So I looked at him and said, what kind of bass tournament were you at? And I'm thinking, how weird is that? Why would you put a camo on a bass tournament? That didn't make any sense. It made no sense. But my brain made it fit my experience. If you all don't structurally put in pause points to look at technology options to make yourself think differently, you are just naturally going to think the way you've always thought because it's the way you're designed. So I don't think it works to go, oh, I'm just going to remember to do that. You won't. You'll get busy. You'll be on confirmation bias. And it's not a fault. It's the way you're built. So the way to prevent it is to design it in so you're forced to stop and think differently. And I think that's really your only protection, really, because of the level of change. Here's a few other things I think about what it means to you. I think as we look into the future, you're going to be buying more data, not going out and collecting it. I think there'll be some specific data elements that you're going to have to collect because nobody else is going to want it but you, and you'll have to collect it. Everything else you'll be able to buy. Data analytics, we talked about that. I think some of the stuff that you're doing at the university is really great. Some of it you might just purchase some of those services because you're going to have it. We talked about traveler information, 511. I think there's some things that you can start doing now. And part of it is around the data. This is what I meant to ask you guys about. I forgot about it when we were having lunch, but this is what I was going to ask you. This is the kind of thing I think that is really important. To begin now to think about the data that you use or would like to use, or even think about the information you'd like to have to operate your system. Because some of the data might be different than the way we've always collected it, but the information is really what's important. And so what I was thinking with you all is that this would be a great thing for you all to look at across the DOT. What is the information that you need to do your business? Because once you know the information, then you begin to have a better handle on, can you open it up? Is that okay for you? Is it not okay for you? Does that fit your mission? Does it not? Is it too risky? I don't know. I would challenge some of those assumptions, by the way. Will DSRC help you or not? Does it fit your needs or not? I also don't think it's too early to think about where you would use DSRC or 5G LTE, whatever it is. Where would you use it? Because it's not everywhere. And you could begin to look at those things so that you're ready. So if it shows up on a tip or a stip, and you've taken that pause point, you can go, okay, wait, this is one of those ones. We're gonna installing a new traffic signal system on this corridor anyway. What do we know? How much more is it going to cost us to put in that capability? And so that makes some sense. High crash intersections. I don't think you need it on everyone. As V to V grows, right, it begins to supplant V to I. So there's a time horizon in there where it doesn't make it's not cost effective, but I don't know what the time horizon is. If there are quarters where you really have intense data needs, unexpected curves, alignment changes, something that's unique, that AASHTO footprint analysis is really helpful there. Here are some of the things, this is my to-do list. If I got to choose, I would study the data and see what you need. I would open as much data as you can. I would challenge some of the thinking on that, because the first thing you're going to hear is there's too big of a liability. Right? It's the first thing you'll hear. I would begin to dig under the cover around that and actually challenge the assumption a little bit. I would assess some of the DSRC LTE locations. Watch NHTSA. Watch what they say when they come out with that notice of proposed rulemaking. Look at the data elements. Get some of your smart data people and look at the data elements. You can't take this one at the surface. You really got to dig under the cover on that one. Watch the AV market. I would even have somebody assigned to watch it and see how it's developing. What's that crystal ball looking like? Build in flexibility, and then we so need some basic research. That's where you can combine with some of the other universities, you can combine with Sharp2, NCHRP, some of the other AASHTO organizations, your counterparts in other areas. We need some of that basic information just to be able to do scenario planning. We just don't have it. It's all about connecting the dots. It's about connecting the dots. So let me tell you about the little boy. So that little boy, he said, my next favorite thing is what I'm going to do today. And I said, well, what are you going to do today? And he said, I'm going treasure hunting in the Louvre. I think he was wildly successful treasure hunting in the Louvre. That's your Louvre. In there are the treasures for your next favorite thing. In there is the future of transportation. It's in there that the excitement lives. There has never been a more exciting time to be in transportation. But we gotta go treasure hunting and be open to seeing it. I'm here to have a conversation and get your input and see what you think. So thanks so much for this opportunity to be here. Thoughts, ideas, questions? How are we doing? Plenty of time. Scott?
Well, we got time. I'm going to take a few questions.
Our discussion, comments. What do you think? Excited, scared, really depressed. Yes, sir.
For those of us who couldn't make it to TRB, what was the hot thing on this subject out there?
I, too, could not make it to TRB, so I can't tell you. Maybe somebody here was at TRB. Any thoughts on that? What was the hot thing? Yes, Sandra.
I can tell you that I went to about 7 sessions on automated vehicles, connected vehicles. So all of these things, I would say every session I could put in my schedule. And there was just electronic newsletters and PRB, and so a lot of those sessions are available online. Just came out the last day or so.
Were there any big picture takeaways that you just kind of stood out for you?
If you touched on some of those things, certainly there is a debate on how fast automated is going to be. In the past, we've heard a lot about connected, a real focus on connected vehicles, and it seemed like there was a connected or an automated autonomous vehicle camp. And what I took away from that today is it's going to be more in between, and so not one or the other necessarily, but working together, and then in those areas where it's not so clear that it's one or the other.
One thing to keep in mind, that autonomous vehicles, as we've talked about them here, do not require connectivity. It was a very specific strategy in the development that they don't require connectivity. If they had it, would they use it? Absolutely. But is it required? It's not required. Yeah.
One of the interesting things was that there was a couple of sessions I sat through where people spoke to the benefit of weights specifically and how good the crowdsourcing information or how valuable it was. At the same time, the same group of people were gnashing their teeth over their data. It's not, we don't control it.
Right.
And rectifying that within themselves was something they're still working on.
So that's an important thing that you just said, is that it's all rectifying within ourselves. And I think that's a big part of this. Part of, I think, that is the thing that we have to accept is that we in this industry have always kind of controlled the way transportation happened. Not anymore. Not anymore. It's being controlled outside of us, and it's how do we play now. That's really a good comment.
I think also I've been part of the action subcommittee of the SSOM for a number of years, and connected autonomous vehicles, VDI, all this was some of the things we were really focusing on. And every time we set a goal or objective, it takes government so long to make things happen that industry made everything we were doing obsolete within a year. And then we would replan and come up with another plan. The role of government versus the role of industry. I still don't know that we pinpointed what those are and we've hit the swing spot. And I think that's an area that we have to work, because when we refine that and we understand and they work together, that's when this will really move faster than what it is right now.
And it's moving fast now.
It is.
Yeah.
So regarding dirty data, there are technology out there where you can outsource your quality assurance. So like a messenger, you can put the data there, and you get 1 cent, and you're looking manually without looking the road and saying that the data is correct or not.
So you can just so everybody else, you can outsource the cleaning of the dirty data.
Yeah.
Well, that's handy. And it's cheap. Yeah. Yes.
And so, as all the DOTs and NPOs, we do a 30 years for the long-range plans. Now, based on the information you provided and what we're hearing, why did Federal Highway not emphasize that in the cascade, saying all the planning agencies start addressing this?
Good question. I don't work for Federal Highway Administration anymore. Good question. You got the gospel according to Shelley. And I will tell you, I ran the Joint Program Office for 5 years. And this has changed a lot in those intervening years, so that's my out. However, I don't feel good about being as clear as I think that we should have with the planning community, as also with the DOT communities about what you could actually expect from the data. And so one of the reasons that I like to be with you is because I worry that you're not getting the level of clarity that I think that you deserve about what's possible. Now, the planning office, as I understand it, I'm working on a project through FHWA. I'm a subconsultant. And so it's the first one. And that's where we did some survey information with planning organizations. I didn't interview anybody that wasn't at least aware, of course, of what's going on, but nobody has the tools to really do much with it. Yeah, it's clearly an area where we need a lot more attention. The other thing I worry about, though, even if we went to NCHRP, how fast does NCHRP move? Really slow. Really slow. I think that's a fundamental problem, but that's TRB's problem. I don't have to do that, but it's really slow. And we need some of the basic information. So it's a good question. Yes?
So, as a transportation planner, this sounds all very exciting and interesting. It sounds like a lot of work. But I'm also kind of thinking outside of transportation, and I'm curious in your discussions with other groups, if you've heard of how, widespread implementation of automated or connected vehicles, how that would affect things outside transportation. So particularly land use and employment. I'm thinking land use, you brought up parking. I think of a lot of the business models, like, a lot of your Best Buys, your big box stores that might not be able to compete how people go shopping. We might order something to be delivered from Walmart rather than going to the Walmart because it's so cheap to just send one of those little phone cars out there. So there's that, and I also think of employment too. We see it with Uber and taxi drivers, but I'm thinking more so with trucking.
Oh, yeah.
That's the biggest employer
Yeah,
in most states. The most common job is to be a trucker.
Yep.
And both of those I see as potentially having huge negative impacts, or at least revolutionary impacts. So I'm curious what you've heard in this discussion.
Yeah, so all of those are, we don't know. The easy answer, we don't know any of that. What I would say, I'm also on a small part of a team that's also working through, this is an NCHRP study that's looking at the impacts of connected autonomous vehicles in transportation departments. And any economist here? Economist? Okay, good. Phew. My husband's an economist too. So they have an economist on the team, and one of the questions to the economist are, what are some of the positive and negative externalities that you would expect from this technology, and particularly ones that government agencies like a DOT might be able to have some influence on so that the externalities get internalized into the companies. So that, just saying that actually makes my head kind of explode. And listening to them explain it was really hard. They came up with the issue about the truckers, but that's not the only one. There would be other shifts in populations, and it's not the only time it's ever happened, but that would definitely be a negative externality. So I don't have any answers to that, but those are the kind of questions. The land use one is the one I'm fascinated by, though. And you're probably not that, that's always been one of the tug of wars within transportation and land use, and clearly there's a link, but the responsibility lines aren't so clear. I think that one's going to be the really big one. People like ITE and the trip generation model, and then what's that parking thing? I used to work for ITE. What's the parking one? They've got a big document about how much parking you need. It says, if you're going to be a Walmart, then you need to provide X number of spaces of parking for however many square feet of building. That document, see, we might as well just blow that up and start all over. It's just going to be completely different. Yes?
Well, I think also when you look at this, autonomous vehicles will be very disruptive, because you got to look at all the other technology that's occurring at the same time.
That's so true.
There, when you're looking at robotics, AI, 3D printing, all that being blended, they're all changing exponentially too.
And we haven't talked about drones. That's another big one. Oh, and the other thing that you mentioned that brought something up to me, who was I? I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were at the airport, and they had left something at home, so they contacted Uber, and Uber went to their house. Whoever it was, their husband or whatever, gave them maybe the passport, and Uber drove the passport to the airport to meet them, right? So you can imagine that kind of thing becoming a service model. You just don't need the driver in the car, right? So you go grocery shopping, and you put the groceries in the car and send them home, to have them dropped off at the curbside or something. So there's so many possibilities you can't imagine. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I'm really interested with your proposal to kind of build these pause points, but it kind of also reflecting on your second point about the confirmation bias, and it kind of strikes me like we would need to not only have the pause, but also try to figure out how to involve people who aren't just going to see what they've always seen in order to kind of actually have that be a real evaluation process. Do you have any examples of that or thoughts on that?
What the literature would suggest in any kind of confirmation bias, that the one way that you deal with that is that you have people who come from very different backgrounds from each other, because you see things the way that you've seen them, and everybody here has a different background. But the more diversity you can have in that small group of people who might be looking at it, and in that situation, age diversity would be really important, right? Because for sure, I'm not going to see possibilities that somebody, like those high schoolers, that they're going to see. And I also think that if you had somebody whose kind of job it was to be the out-of-box thinker, that they're the ones that are going to some of the conferences and they're the ones trying to figure out, well, what does this look like? And you have them injected to the mix, that would also be helpful. That's a really good question. And confirmation bias is on everything. That's one of the reasons that we see companies that have diverse boards do better than companies that don't. So you begin to see that when you have things that you can see from a lot of different perspectives, it actually makes the whole better. Other thoughts, comments? Yes?
What kind of data do you think the DOT should be purchasing instead of generating?
I would talk to your data people, but I think in general, a lot of the data that you're getting right now from INRIX, you can get from here, anything that you can get about the operation of the facility, I think you can purchase that. You wouldn't have to go get it. I don't know, like in my world, in Maryland, where I'm from, we have a Bay Bridge that goes across the Chesapeake Bay. It's very important to have wind speeds at various different places along that bridge. And the DOT provides wind warnings for that. So that's really critical for the truckers. I don't know that it's so critical that somebody could make money off of it if they got it, privately and sold it. I don't know if it's that critical. So that to me is an example where the DOTs will probably have to continue collecting that specific information that nobody else really can monetize. The trick is what cannot be monetized. And then you have to go get that. And I don't know what it would be for you all. In other areas, hurricane evacuation routes, or maybe areas where you want more dense data, and maybe you want some specific data that you wouldn't normally get through INRIX. I don't know. But it's anything that's got a very specialized use is what I would be looking for.
Yeah, I think, other data, it depends on what instrumentation cards have. Right now we pay for data collection in terms of our infrastructure. So ride, crack data, LiDAR data, that vehicles could have that. So that we could be, this is instantaneous. We'd be harvesting that information instead of having a contractor or ourselves going out there trying to understand the condition of our asset.
So that's a really good point. And so if you couldn't hear, he was talking about that vehicles could be getting things about the pavement. Smart tires can actually get things like friction. They think there are apps that could identify potholes, for example. You got to get the data. So one thing that I think we ought to be attentive to are different kinds of business models. So the data that you all have is not the only thing that you have that's of value. Right away, power, poles, those things could have value to someone who wants to do micro communication sites like cellular, or those access to the right of way. Maybe you're able to barter access for data. I don't know. I don't know that that's come up, but I would sure be on the lookout for that. and be open to it. Because there might be some things that are opening to us that we've never thought of. And they could use access, they being like cell companies. Yeah, so it's an interesting model.
Well, I think we're looking at that with the winter operations, how we have partnerships, looking at here or other providers, that we aren't going to necessarily be providing the information for that 511, but when we provide performance data such as how well we're operating the system in the winter with our cloud data, other things, tying that with multiple sources, and then a private vendor actually provides that out, and they can help us with the analysis or the apps to maybe instead of a snow-covered road, a risk rating or something else as multiple feeds of information that I would agree, we don't have the talent to develop that application. And we can't really sell it as a private firm can and we could.
Right. Yeah. Innovative thinking and innovative partnerships, I think, will be the way of the future for transportation agencies. Yeah. Again, let me just say thank you, Scott. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. You know what? I think I must have just blown by that slide. I didn't say it. Let me just say it to you all. One thing that the National League of Cities just did is they studied regional transportation plans. Only 6% of regional transportation plans even mention the stuff we just talked about. 6%. So the fact that you all are here, that you're talking about it, that you're even thinking about it, puts you in the more advanced than 94% of the planning organizations out there. That is an A. I think it's an A+, actually. So I applaud you all for wanting to have the conversation, for teeing up a discussion, whether it's me or whoever else that you bring in the next time. I think it's just remarkable and wonderful. And you know what? Your residents in Iowa are going to benefit from that level of foresight that you're putting into this. So I really applaud you for doing this. And thank you all for taking time out of your very busy days to participate today. Scott.
Shelley, thank you very much. I especially appreciate your wisdom about high-risk criteria, wisdom about false points. I think we're going to take some of these ideas and really begin to adjust them here. For those of you who may not be aware, we do have a partnership with Waze in our Cars 511 system. So we share data with Waze, and so you can see Waze information on Cars 511, and as well as our incident information on the Waze app. So if you're not aware, check that out at some point. Another thing I wanted to share briefly, since we're on this topic of connected and autonomous vehicles, is as part of our agency's TISMO plan, our operations plan, we're developing a connected and autonomous vehicle service layer is what we call it. It's essentially a plan for connected and autonomous vehicles. Now, obviously, we don't have a lot of details right now. You know, the jury is still kind of out. But we just want to begin thinking at a high level, what does it mean for our agency? We hear stories all the time about should we be investing in the SRC, for example. So anyway, there's my plugs for what we're up to. Thank you again, Shelley. Thanks everyone for coming. Please travel safe.